Peter Parker wasn't a man of great fortune, but his love for the land ran deep. A quiet rancher living on the outskirts of the desert, he spent his days tending to his small herd of cattle and repairing fences that were slowly crumbling under the weight of time. The ranch was his legacy, passed down from his father, and though it was struggling, it was all he had left. Most days, the wind whispered secrets through the cracked windows of his weathered cabin, and the only visitors were the occasional coyotes that howled at the moon. But one hot summer afternoon, while driving into town to gather supplies, Peter heard a story that would change everything. A local trader was selling off a foal for the unheard-of price of 50 cents. Peter's first instinct was to dismiss it. It was probably a sickly, worthless animal, the kind no one wanted. But something about the foal's fate stuck with him. He didn't have much money to spare, but when he returned home with the foal, a small, trembling creature with a coat the color of dust, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The foal, too weak to stand on her own, staggered as Peter carried her into the barn, her wide eyes searching for safety. He named her Sierra, after the mountain range he could just make out in the distance, the same mountains where untold secrets seemed to hide. The traders had warned him that she was no good, a useless foal, they had called her. But Peter wasn't one to turn away from a challenge. He had seen plenty of sickly animals in his day, and he had learned to never write them off too soon. But as he watched Sierra fall asleep in the hay, an unsettling thought nagged at him. There was something about this foal, something he couldn't place. It was more than just a fragile animal. It felt like she was waiting for something, like she had a purpose he couldn't yet understand. As the days went by, Peter found himself spending more and more time with Sierra. She grew stronger, but so did his curiosity about her strange presence. What had he brought into his life? And why did it feel like she was leading him toward something far greater than he could have ever imagined? Little did he know, the answer would soon come, not in the barn, but deep within the desert that stretched endlessly beyond the ranch. And when it came, it would change his life forever. The days bled into weeks, and Peter's bond with Sierra grew deeper with each passing moment. At first, she had been a fragile creature, barely able to stand on her own, her legs shaking as though the weight of the world was too much for her. But there was something in her eyes, a quiet strength that hinted at resilience beyond her years. Slowly, Peter tended to her wounds, fed her the grain he could spare, and offered her comfort in a world that had been harsh to her. Sierra's physical recovery was slow but steady. She started to gain weight, her coat growing thicker and more lustrous, a silvery sheen that glimmered under the desert sun. As she grew stronger, Peter couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in her demeanor. Where most foals were skittish and fearful of anything new, Sierra exuded an air of calm and purpose. She moved with a fluid grace, like a creature far older than her years. But it wasn't just her physical strength that was extraordinary, it was her presence. Peter found himself speaking to her more often, as though she understood every word. He'd joke aloud, "If only you could talk, Sierra, we might figure out what's really going on here." But every time he spoke to her, she'd glance back, her wide eyes calm yet somehow knowing, as if she understood the weight of his words. The ranch, once silent and still, began to feel alive with an energy Peter couldn't quite explain. Over time, something else began to shift in the air, a quiet sensation that Peter couldn't shake. The desert around the ranch, which had always felt so desolate and barren, seemed to be changing. The harsh winds that usually stripped the land of its moisture had softened. Even the sun, which once felt relentless and unforgiving, now seemed to offer its warmth in gentler waves. Peter could feel it. The land was alive in a way it never had been before, as if some unseen force had breathed life into the earth itself. He'd wake up early in the morning and catch Sierra standing at the edge of the property, staring out at the horizon, as if she was watching something beyond his sight. There was an awareness in her that felt ancient. One morning, as Peter was working on a fence near the edge of the ranch, he saw Sierra standing in the distance. She wasn't grazing or idly walking around like most horses. She was facing the direction of the mountains, her ears pricked and her head slightly tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. Her body seemed tense, her muscles coiled like a spring, and for a moment, Peter felt a strange, almost overwhelming urge to follow her. He set his tools down and walked toward her, his boots crunching against the dry earth. As he approached, Sierra's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something in her that he hadn't before, an undeniable knowing. It was as if she was calling him, urging him to step beyond the boundaries of the ranch, to venture into the wilderness that lay just beyond the horizon. "Where are you leading me, Sierra?" he whispered, half to himself. But Sierra only flicked her tail, her gaze never leaving his. She took a slow step forward, then another, as though beckoning him to follow. Peter felt an inexplicable pull, a sense that this moment was meant to be. Whatever journey Sierra was preparing to take him on, Peter knew deep down that it would change everything. But what was waiting out there, just beyond the ranch, beyond the mountains that loomed in the distance? And why did it feel like Sierra, the foal he had once thought was nothing more than a broken animal, was guiding him toward something far greater than he could imagine? His questions hung in the air like the dust settling over the desert, unanswered for now. But one thing was clear: whatever path Sierra had in mind, Peter would follow. And it was a path that would lead them into the heart of a mystery buried in the very land that had always been his home. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon when Peter saddled up Sierra, her coat gleaming in the soft evening light. He had been putting off the idea of following her lead for weeks, but today, something felt different. The pull was too strong to ignore. The feeling in the pit of his stomach, the one that told him Sierra was guiding him toward something important, had only grown stronger. He could no longer deny it. The foal, once fragile and helpless, had become his guide, and now it was time to see where she would lead him. Peter tightened the reins, giving Sierra a gentle nudge. The mare, usually so calm, seemed eager to begin the journey, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. She moved with purpose, her steps sure and steady as she guided them away from the familiar comforts of the ranch and into the vast wilderness. The path ahead was unfamiliar to Peter, yet it felt as though they were retracing the steps of someone who had walked this land long before him. The desert was still, save for the soft breeze that carried the scent of sagebrush and dust. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to unfold. As they ventured deeper into the wilderness, Peter couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just traveling through a barren landscape, they were entering a place of great significance. The silence was different here. It wasn't the emptiness of isolation that often filled the desert. It was something more profound, as if the land itself held ancient secrets that had been waiting to be uncovered. Sierra led him on, her steps unwavering as she cut through the dry terrain. Peter followed without question, his trust in her growing with every step. The evening sky shifted from soft pinks and oranges to a deep violet, and the air grew cooler as the stars began to appear in the sky, one by one. They rode for hours, with nothing but the sound of Sierra's hooves against the earth and the distant calls of coyotes in the night. Just as Peter was beginning to wonder if they were venturing too far, Sierra stopped abruptly. She stood still, her ears pricked, her body tense with focus. Peter pulled gently on the reins, bringing her to a halt. For a moment, they stood in perfect silence, the night air thick with anticipation. Sierra's gaze was fixed on the ground ahead, and Peter followed her line of sight, squinting into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing. The land stretched out before him, bathed in moonlight, a vast, empty expanse. But then, just beyond a cluster of rocks, something caught his eye. A faint outline too symmetrical, too deliberate to be natural. His heart quickened as he urged Sierra forward. The pair moved toward the spot, and as they neared, the outline became clearer. A large stone formation, half buried in the sand. It looked like a doorway and entrance into the earth, hidden by the passage of time. Peter dismounted, his boots crunching against the gravelly surface as he approached the stone. Sierra stood a few feet away, her gaze never leaving the formation. Peter knelt down and brushed away the sand and dirt that had accumulated over the centuries, revealing a set of intricate carvings on the stone. Symbols. Ancient markings, unlike anything he had ever seen. His fingers traced the lines, feeling the cold stone beneath his touch. The markings were worn with age, but there was no mistaking their significance. This was no ordinary rock formation. It was something much older, something with purpose. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Could this be what Sierra had been leading him toward? An artifact of some kind? The remnants of a civilization lost to time? The markings were eerily familiar, echoing patterns he had seen in local folklore, a legend of a long-lost tribe that had once inhabited this land, a tribe said to have a deep, spiritual connection to the desert and its creatures. Peter stood up, feeling a surge of excitement mixed with fear. The thought that he might have stumbled upon something truly extraordinary sent a shiver down his spine. He glanced at Sierra, who remained still, watching him with an almost knowing expression. She had brought him here, this was no accident. But why? What was the significance of this discovery? And what was he supposed to do with it? As the moonlight bathed the scene in an ethereal glow, Peter noticed something else, a small, weathered box half buried beneath the stone formation. His breath caught in his throat. Could this be the treasure, the artifact that Sierra had been guiding him to? With trembling hands, he carefully removed the box, brushing away the dirt and sand that had concealed it for what felt like centuries. The box was heavy, its surface etched with more symbols. Peter felt a strange energy radiating from it, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Slowly, he lifted the lid, revealing its contents, a collection of intricately carved stones and ancient scrolls, wrapped in what appeared to be dried leather. Each item exuded a sense of reverence, as though they were sacred relics that had been hidden away for safekeeping. Peter's heart raced as he realized the magnitude of what he had just uncovered. This wasn't just a treasure, this was a legacy. A piece of history that had been lost for generations, waiting to be rediscovered. And Sierra, the foal he had bought for a mere 50 cents, had led him here, to the heart of the desert, to unlock the mysteries of the past. The world around him seemed to hold its breath, as if acknowledging the discovery. Sierra stood quietly beside him, her eyes soft but focused, as though she knew this was only the beginning. The answers he sought were within his grasp, but the questions were only just beginning. What had he uncovered, and what would this discovery mean for him, for the ranch, and for the desert that had once seemed so empty? As the cool night air settled around him, Peter realized that his life would never be the same. He had come in search of nothing more than a foal, but in the wilderness, he had found something far more valuable. Peter's hands trembled as he sifted through the ancient scrolls, the desert night heavy with anticipation. The box he had uncovered held more than just relics, it was a map, a guide to something buried deep in the unforgiving wilderness. The symbols on the map matched those on the stone formations, and as his fingers traced the patterns, Peter felt a surge of realization. This was no coincidence. The markings weren't just ancient art, they were instructions, a roadmap left behind by a civilization that had disappeared centuries ago. Sierra stood by his side, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her presence calm but unmistakably determined. The foal he had once thought to be fragile had now become his guide, leading him into the depths of a desert that seemed to hold its breath. Peter felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. This wasn't just about a lost tribe, it was about the connection between Sierra, the land, and the mystery he was only beginning to understand. He unrolled the scroll, revealing intricate carvings that seemed to depict not only locations but stories. Stories of a people whose wisdom had been forgotten, hidden beneath the sands. The desert, so vast and empty, was alive with history, waiting for someone to listen. As Sierra nudged him forward, her eyes fixed on the map's final destination, Peter felt an undeniable pull. The map led to a place deep in the wilderness, a place where few dared to tread. With Sierra by his side, Peter knew he couldn't ignore the call. The desert had secrets, and Sierra was the key to unlocking them. Determined, he mounted Sierra once more. Their journey into the heart of the desert was just beginning, and the answers, he knew, were waiting for them in the shifting sands. As Peter and Sierra journeyed deeper into the desert, the landscape grew harsher, the land more desolate. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the jagged terrain. Peter's heart pounded as they approached the final point on the map, a narrow canyon, hidden from the world. The air felt thick with anticipation, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Sierra moved with ease, leading him confidently through the rugged path, her hooves crunching softly on the dry earth. At the base of the canyon, they discovered an entrance, an ancient stone archway, worn with time but still standing strong. Peter dismounted and approached, the weight of the moment settling over him. The carvings on the archway matched the markings he had seen on the stone formation back at the ranch, symbols that had been passed down by the lost tribe, their meaning still veiled in mystery. Inside, hidden beneath layers of dust and sand, lay the heart of the desert's secrets. Peter's breath caught as he uncovered an underground chamber, its walls adorned with vibrant murals depicting the tribe's history, their connection to the land, and their reverence for the natural world. At the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal, upon which rested a glowing crystal, its light pulsing softly. As Peter reached out to touch the crystal, a rush of knowledge flooded his mind. The tribe had once been guardians of this land, protectors of its sacred energy. Sierra, the foal he had saved, was more than just an animal, she was a chosen guardian, the last link to an ancient legacy. In that moment, Peter understood. The desert's true treasure wasn't gold or jewels, it was the knowledge of the past, the wisdom of a forgotten people, and the deep, unbroken bond between humans, animals, and the land itself. Peter stood in the heart of the ancient chamber, the glowing crystal casting soft light over the murals that adorned the walls. Sierra stood by his side, her presence as calm and steady as ever, as though this discovery was the fulfillment of a long-awaited prophecy. The weight of everything he had uncovered settled on him, and for the first time in his life, he understood his true place in the vast expanse of the desert. The treasure was not material wealth, it was a deeper, richer understanding of the land and its history, a legacy that had been entrusted to him and Sierra. The lost tribe, the guardians of this sacred place, had left behind a message: to protect, to honor, and to live in harmony with the earth. Peter's life, once filled with solitude and struggle, now had a profound purpose. He had come to the desert searching for nothing more than a broken foal, and instead, he had found a legacy that would change the course of his life forever. As they made their way back toward the ranch, the weight of the crystal in his pocket felt like a promise, one that would guide him and Sierra in the years to come. They were no longer just a rancher and a foal. They were the keepers of a long-forgotten history, connected to the land in ways Peter had never imagined. The journey had just begun.